and Clara felt her knees weaken like she might collapse. But Luke gently steadied her with a hand on her elbow and guided her to a chair while his dogs circled the children, sniffing them gently like they knew these little ones needed kindness more than anything. Luke saw the way Rosie's eyes followed the scent of the turkey resting on the counter and how Caleb kept swallowing hard like he was trying not to ask for food. And it tore him open deeper than he expected. So without another word, he walked to the long wooden table, pulled out all 4 chairs, and in a voice rough with memories, he whispered, "Sit," before grabbing plates and setting the table like he hadn't done since his wife was alive. Clara tried to protest, murmuring that they didn't want to trouble him, that they'd eat anything, even scraps. But Luke shook his head and said, "Thanksgiving ain't scraps, not in my home." And something about the way he said home made Clara's eyes fill with tears as Emma led the younger kids to the table, sitting as though they had stepped into a dream too fragile to touch. Luke carved the turkey with hands that trembled, not from cold, but from emotion, because with every slice, he heard echoes of his wife laughing next to him, saw flashes of his son banging his little toy spoon on the table, and he realized that feeding this family felt like letting light back into a house he'd kept dark for far too long. When he placed the first plate in front of Rosie, the toddler looked up at him with pure, innocent wonder, and in that tiny gaze, Luke felt something thaw inside him, a place that had been frozen, solid for half a decade, and as the children ate, devouring the warm food with quiet gratitude instead of wild desperation, Clara watched Luke with a mixture of awe and disbelief, sensing that this man who lived like a ghost had just breathed life into himself by saving hers. After dinner, Luke lit the fireplace brighter, brought blankets, insisted the kids take the warm bed while he slept on the couch. And when Clara whispered, "We'll leave in the morning," "I don't want to burden you," he simply said. "You're not a burden. You're guests, and nobody should walk out hungry into the cold." But Clara sensed something deeper behind his words, something aching and lonely, something that needed their presence just as much as they needed his shelter. That night, after the kids were asleep, Clara sat with Luke by the fire, sharing her story, her struggles, her fears, her husband's death, and Luke shared, for the first time in years, the story he had locked inside, the loss, the guilt, the silence that had lived with him ever since. Their stories braided together like 2 broken halves, finding a bridge. And by the time the embers glowed low, Clara realized she had knocked on the door of a stranger and found a man who might just become the reason her family survived. Outside, the snow began to fall in soft, gentle flakes, as though the world itself was blessing the grandmother taught her, their hands brushing occasionally in ways that made the air between them feel warmer than the crackling stove. The children decorated the table using pine cones and scraps of ribbon Luke found in an old drawer, and when everything was done, the turkey golden, the mashed potatoes steaming, the pies cooling on the counter, Luke stood back, looking at the festive scene with an expression that flickered between awe and heartbreak, because he had forgotten what a home filled with life looked like, forgotten how it felt to hear footsteps and laughter echoing in rooms that had been silent for so long. When they sat down to eat, Luke hesitated, his eyes landing on the empty chairs that used to belong to his wife and son. But before sorrow could take hold, Rosie reached out her tiny hand and touched his arm, as if anchoring him to the present. And he blinked away the shadows as Clara whispered softly, "You gave us a place at your table. Now let us give you company at it." Luke bowed his head for a long moment, then began to speak, his voice thick with emotion as he gave thanks, not for the food, not even for the holiday, but for the simple fact that nobody's eating alone today. And he reached for Rosie's hand, then Emma's, then Caleb's, and finally Clara's, holding them in a circle that felt like a promise. They ate until their stomachs ached with fullness, and laughter filled the ranch like music. But as the afternoon sun dipped lower, Clara grew anxious, reminding Luke that they could not stay, that she had no right to impose longer than one night. But Luke simply leaned on the counter, folded his arms, and asked calmly, "Do you have anywhere warm to go? Any food stored? Anyone expecting you?" And Clara's silence was answer enough. Emma spoke then, her voice small but brave, saying, "We don't want to go, Mama." And Caleb nodded fiercely while Rosie clung to Luke's pant leg like he was already part of the family. And Clara felt something inside her crumble, admitting softly, "We don't have anywhere," the words tasting like defeat and fear all at once. But Luke stepped forward, his voice steady, gentle, and full of a strength she hadn't known she needed, and said, "Then stay. Stay here, as long as you need. This place has been empty too long." And Clara looked into his eyes, seeing no pity, only sincerity, and a hope he didn't bother hiding. She tried to argue, saying she couldn't repay him, couldn't give anything in return. But Luke shook his head and said, "You already have. You brought life back into this home." And in that moment, Clara felt something shift, like the universe had carved out a tiny corner of mercy just for them. The children erupted into cheers, hugging Luke, dancing around the living room. And even Rosie kissed his cheek with sticky pie-covered lips, making him laugh, a real, deep, genuine laugh he thought he had lost forever. As the night settled in and Clara tucked the kids into the soft bed they had slept in, the warmth inside the ranch, and Luke looked at the sleeping children, then at Clara, and whispered, "Tomorrow's Thanksgiving, and I got a feeling this year won't be lonely anymore." By the time dawn crept over the Wyoming plains, painting the frost-covered world in soft gold, Clara awoke to the crackling of a fire already burning strong in the hearth, the smell of fresh biscuits warming in the oven, and the soft murmur of Luke's voice as he spoke to Emma and Caleb, teaching them how to stir something in a pot on the stove. She sat up slowly, hardly believing that she was waking in a warm bed rather than a cold roadside ditch, and seeing her children, smiling, truly smiling for the first time in months, made her throat tighten with emotion. She stepped out into the hallway and found Luke wearing an apron too small for his broad shoulders, showing the children how to knead dough with slow, steady patience. And when he looked up and saw her, the quiet warmth in his eyes made her feel seen, safe, and something she hadn't felt in years, valued. The kids swarmed her, talking all at once about how Luke let them help, how he told stories about ranch life, how his dogs were the funniest animals they'd ever seen. And Clara watched the rancher's face soften in a way that made it clear he hadn't had laughter in his kitchen for a very long time. Breakfast was simple, biscuits, eggs, and warm milk, but to Clara and the kids it tasted like a feast. And as Rosie sat on Luke's lap, giggling while he wiped a smear of butter off her cheek, Clara felt a burst of gratitude, so strong she closed her eyes for a moment to gather herself. But Luke noticed, gently asking if she was all right, and she answered with a smile that held 1,000 unspoken thank yous. After breakfast, Luke took the children to the barn, showing them the horses, letting Emma brush a gentle mare named Willow while Caleb fed hay to an old gelding who nudged him like they were old friends. And Rosie toddled after the ranch dogs with squeals of pure joy, the sound echoing through the once silent barn like sunshine through winter gloom. Clara watched Luke from the doorway, watched how he knelt to Caleb's height, how he lifted Rosie into the saddle and walked beside her with a protective hand, how he spoke to Emma as though she were an adult capable of anything. And she realized this man was not just helping them. He was healing himself with every moment he spent bringing joy to her children. When they returned to the house, Luke asked Clara if she would help him prepare the Thanksgiving meal, and though her cheeks reddened with embarrassment, thinking of how she had nothing to offer, he shook his head gently and said, "You being here is enough." And Clara felt tears prick her eyes, again as she tied an apron around her waist. They cooked together for hours, sharing small stories, learning the rhythm of each other's movements. Luke chopping vegetables with quiet precision, while Clara mixed spices the way her. Night before, Luke waited by the fireplace, feeling strangely nervous, as though he were standing at the edge of a new beginning he hadn't dared to imagine. Clara joined him, their chairs close enough that their shoulders brushed, and she whispered, "You saved us." But Luke shook his head slowly and whispered back, "You saved me." First, because he realized that in opening his door to a starving family, he had opened the locked door of his heart as well. They sat in silence, the fire painting gold on Clara's face, the warmth settling into Luke's chest like a promise. And for the first time in years, he felt peaceful, truly peaceful, as though Thanksgiving had finally returned to him after so long wandering in the cold. Outside, snowflakes drifted softly past the windows, and Luke looked at Clara, then at the children sleeping safely down the hall. And he knew in his bones that this Thanksgiving Eve, this simple knock on his door, had rewritten all their lives forever. And as the flames crackled, Luke whispered almost to himself, "You're home now." And though Clara didn't answer, the tears in her eyes and the softness of her smile told him she felt the same. A strong subscribe CTA for your video. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many more lives we can touch together. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to the world. Stay with us. Your next life-changing story is coming.